Okay, in my practice, there are two primary components to the work that I do as a cybersecurity data privacy attorney. One is I help companies from a proactive standpoint in understanding their cyber risks and implementing an appropriate risk management program. The second aspect of my practice is guiding companies as a breach guide or a breach quarterback through the response process when they've had either a major incident or an actual data breach. And in doing that, over the years, I've come to have a little different perspective on the types of incidents and breaches that companies have and the things that cause them than what you often see if you spend much time watching the news or reading blogs and publications about cybersecurity. So what I've done is I've used my experience, the experience I've gained from these types of studies, and put together a checklist of what I consider to be basic cyber hygiene practices or good common cybersecurity best practices that companies should use. The first is you always start with a risk assessment. You have to understand the nature of the data you have, the nature of your environment, the nature of the threats against your company, and you have to have a good understanding of what those are, because our goal here is ultimately to protect our networks and protect our data. And the only way we know what to protect is if we know what our risks are. So you start with a risk assessment, and this doesn't have to be terribly formal. It can be simple. The key is you have to understand what your greatest threats are to your company, to your data, and to your network. Then you do what I feel is one of the most important points, which is have policies and procedures in place for your workforce that help them understand your expectations for cyber defenses and for protecting your data. And this, why I think this is so important is because many of the breaches we see come from employees who simply make mistakes. We're often told that employees are the weakest link, and oftentimes they are. But many of the reasons for that is because we don't do an adequate job of training our employees, of telling them what their expectations are, and of educating them on how to be more diligent and more careful when it comes to cyber risk. So you need a policy in place for your workforce that sets those expectations, that talks about things like social engineering, password management, phishing, use of security questions, writing passwords on sticky notes on a computer monitor. I know that sounds silly, but you would be surprised how many breaches I actually see that are caused by such simple, easy to correct behavior. The next thing you do is you train your workforce on these policies and procedures, and then you train them on good security best practices and basic cyber hygiene. This is how you get them to buy into your system and into your culture of security so that they have a better understanding of what they need to do to help you protect your company. The next thing you do is you phish your workforce. You send calculated phishing messages to people to help train them to learn to understand and spot what these phishing emails are. And if you're not familiar with phishing, this is really where people send emails pretending to be someone they're not. They could be pretending to be FedEx, asking for a delivery. They could be PayPal asking you to update your payment preferences, or it could be something as old as the Nigerian prince promising to give you $25 million if you respond and give them information. The best way to help teach people to avoid these is to practice and do that by sending them test emails and training them whenever they make a mistake and click on them. The next thing you need to do is have multi-factor authentication on your logins to your network and to important cloud services type environments. Multi-factor authentication is when you have to use 2 steps to get into the network or 2 steps to log in. That means like a password and then receiving a text message and clicking on that text, or something like entering a second code, or things like that. Multi-factor authentication is relatively inexpensive to implement, and it's been shown to be incredibly effective at stopping cyber attacks. The next thing you need is good antivirus. I know in today's world we hear a lot about artificial intelligence and machine learning and the effectiveness of those tools, and they are incredibly effective. But there's also a lot of real simple malware floating around on the internet, and the old-fashioned endpoint antivirus that we've used for years is still very effective at taking out a lot of that bad stuff and helping protect your network. Next thing you need to do is evaluate your information on your network and have appropriate internal controls in place. These are ways to help limit the amount of information people have access to, and you want to do this so that they have access to the least amount of information that they need to do their job. Next, installing patches and security updates on your software, not having outdated software. We had several big attacks that occurred back in 2017 that caused a lot of havoc in the business community in the US. One of those was caused because businesses were still using outdated software, Microsoft XP or older, that was no longer being supported by Microsoft and was not being kept current. The vulnerabilities in that old software were exploited, and that's how these big attacks happened. Make sure you're not using outdated software in your environment. And then I mentioned security patches. I know it's annoying to get those little updates and you have to stop what you're doing and click and allow them to operate, but the reason for those updates is that's where researchers have found vulnerabilities in your software, and they're sending out updates to patch those vulnerabilities. Hackers know this, and they know how to take advantage of people who don't install those updates. Make sure you update your computers. Next, we've heard a lot about ransomware over the last couple of years. You know, one of the biggest things I hear companies say is, I'm not worried about cybersecurity because nobody wants my data. I don't have anything that special or that important. Well, it's special and important to your business or you wouldn't have it. And what ransomware does is it often comes with a phishing email. Somebody clicks on the link, and the next thing you know, your entire network and all of your data is encrypted, and you no longer have access to it. And the way you have to get it back is you have to pay hackers a fee through Bitcoin oftentimes to get that data back. The way to avoid this is have good backups. You need to have good backups in place, and they can't be connected to your network, because if they're connected to your network, whenever the hackers attack, they're going to encrypt those backups as well. So you want layers of backups over a certain course of time so that you have multiple copies in case one of those backups happens to get infected. So those are the tips that I have for you on how to better protect your business and avoid having any major cyber incidents or data breaches in the future. If you would like more help with implementing a program that helps you put all of these pieces into place in an organized and logical manner, or if you have an incident and you need more help with that, please feel free to contact me. The best way to do so is through my website, www.shawnetuma.com. Thank you.